Hello everyone, this is part 3 of What If Naruto Was Abused and Leaves Konoha, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Naruto stood open-mouthed staring at the girl, partly because of the language she had used and partly because of what she had said. He broke out of the stupor when she shot him a strange look and he turned to look in the mirror. Much to his surprise when he did so, it wasn't what he had expected. The person who looked back at him from the grease-stained glass didn't have his usual vibrant cerulean eyes. Instead they were a demonic red and the pupils had transformed into slits that went from top side of the iris to the bottom. The girl kept looking at him strangely. It looked like the kid had never seen his eyes before. The way he was staring at his own face made her raise an eyebrow. The shock on his face was priceless. Naruto on the other hand was anything but amused. "QB, what the hell is happening to my eyes?" He heard a hurried groan and he could picture the startled fox wearily rubbing her eyes. "Oh, have you only just noticed? Sorry, I guess I forgot to mention it." Naruto continued to stare slack-jawed at his reflection. "What do you mean you forgot? And what is this?" He heard the creature let out a short chuckle which didn't do anything to calm his slowly growing irritation. "How exactly did you think I altered your sight, Kit? Don't worry, you'll get used to them," she also added with no small amount of mock sensuality, "plus I think they look good on you." Naruto was left pretty speechless after that, not quite sure how to process all of this. When it appeared his brain had actually short-circuited, the demon sighed wearily. "If you really hate it that much then the first jutsu I'll teach you will be the henge, then you can cover it up all you like." Despite trying to sound nonchalant, a small amount of disappointment managed to creep into the ancient being's voice. She had honestly believed Naruto wouldn't mind all that much. They were just eyes after all and it was like having his own dojutsu. He managed to snap himself out of it when he detected the hint of hurt in her voice. However, Naruto, no matter how old, was still useless around women. It's not that bad. I'd just rather you'd have told me about it sooner." He didn't get a reply, but he did hear a small snore fade away into his subconscious that caused him to grind his teeth. Throughout their entire internal conversation, Naruto had completely forgotten about the red-haired girl who had pointed out his eyes in the first place. Being quite impatient, she quickly remedied this in her own unique way. "Hey shithead, you still with me?" Naruto turned, startled and a little angered by the name, only just noticing her presence. She had moved closer to him while he had been out of it and now only stood a foot away from him, watching him curiously. He was again reminded, when he looked into her eyes, that they reflected his own. There was the same pain and loneliness. He was only 7, but Naruto was well versed in the use of emotional masks to hide one's pain. It was obvious that this girl had taken a different option to Naruto when that choice was thrust upon her. Instead of becoming overly nice and cheerful to win people over, she emitted a defensive wall of fake anger and irritability to drive them away. The most obvious example of this was the language she used. Being from a rather old-fashioned place in that aspect, Naruto wasn't quite used to the insults. Of course people would call him names, but they were generally more hurtful than vulgar. "What did you call me?" It wasn't said angrily. Now that he at least somewhat knew her situation, he couldn't hold it against her for not trusting him. "What? You got crap in your ears? Want me to spell it out?" Naruto smirked. Her attitude was cold and designed to push people away. He rationalized that if somebody were to just push through that they could help her. He didn't know why, but some intrinsic part of him wanted to be that person. Maybe some of his mask really had bled into his real personality, as right now he just wanted to help this girl. "Sorry, I guess it's because I didn't tell you my name." He stuck out a hand. "Naruto Uzumaki." The girl seemed startled by the response. Usually by now she had people running away from her or looking at her disapprovingly, in the case of adults. Instead this kid ignored her insults completely. It kind of pissed her off. She glared at the hand like it would give her a disease and made a good show of crossing her arms in response. "No, I called you shithead, 'cause you look like someone with shit in their head." He laughed, something that irritated the girl to no end. Just who was this kid and why could he just shrug her off like this? "Does that mean I can call you Angry Eyes?" The girl was taken aback by his remark. Not only had he completely ignoring her attempts at insulting him, but he had answered in kind. She glared at him and in return his smile broadened. She tried to give him her coldest, most hateful look and he yawned, exaggerating the movement to show he was unperturbed. Jut, who the fuck are you anyway? He finished yawning and his smile returned. I told you, it's Naruto. She glared at him again. I'm not deaf, shithead, I mean why are you acting like this, being nice and shit? Naruto looked at her curiously then shrugged. Why shouldn't I be? The casual nature of the reply took the girl by surprise and in all honesty she couldn't think of a reply, or at least one that wouldn't make her seem petty. Instead her mouth just opened and closed like a fish on dry land. That sight only caused Naruto to break out into laughter, simultaneously enraging the fiery-haired girl and breaking her out of her state of shock. What the fuck are you laughing at? Naruto thought it was a silly question and didn't even stop laughing to answer, the words coming out in gasps between laughs. Your face, so funny, couldn't help it, like a fish. He couldn't get any more out before she started advancing on him menacingly. However, as soon as she brought a fist back to knock the obnoxious kid right between the eyes, he vanished. She looked around startled after a while, questioning her sanity for a moment before a voice right behind her shocked her out of her skin. You gotta be quicker than that, angry eyes. She could feel the smirk radiating off the boy and she instantly turned, fist ready to finish the punch that had failed, only he wasn't there. Oh, that time was a little closer. This time the voice came from above her and when she looked up she saw the kid sitting on one of the rafters in the small room. Stop moving, shithead. He shot her a curious look and tilted his head like a dog who didn't quite understand his master's command. Why would I do that, angry eyes? Then you'd hit me. She glared at him, letting out a small, very unladylike growl in his direction. That's the idea, shithead. And stop calling me that. He laughed again, only briefly this time, and dropped to the floor right in front of her. Well, I can't call you your name, you haven't told me yet. I at least told you mine. She leveled a glare at him but couldn't see the flaw in the kid's logic. Tayuya, he smiled, finally having a name to put with the face. He stuck out his hand again. Nice to meet you, Tayuya. Tayuya gave him exactly the same response as last time but this time added a huff in for good measure. Naruto may have been acting goofy around her but by this point he was extremely curious to know what had happened to Tayuya to make her so jaded against the world. He didn't want to ask though, he knew it would be a touchy subject. Hell, if anybody asked him about his past he would be saddened as well. Well anyway, Tayuya, that scary dude with no eyes told me I gotta look after you. If he's anything like Conan then I'm not breaking that promise. She looked at him incredulously, when the guy who she knew to be called Nagato had said that she had thought that the kid would just walk straight out of here and never give her a backwards glance. The shock on his face when he had said it immediately told her that it wasn't his idea yet he was actually going to do it. What the hell? I'm not going running after some shithead that will probably get me killed within a day. Naruto's smile finally dropped, instead replaced with a more neutral, collected expression that seemed out of place after the way he had just acted. Then where do you plan on going? The question caught her off guard and without a proper response she was left with that same open mouth expression she had earlier. This time Naruto suppressed his chuckle, knowing that it wouldn't do him any good. Well, I need to get going, so if you're coming with me then we need to go now while it's still dark. Tayuya shot him a murderous look with a snarl for effect and Naruto just shrugged before walking out of the room with his hands in his pockets. Tayuya started when she didn't get her desired effect. She watched the boy leave the small room with her feet firmly rooted in place, adamant that she wasn't going to follow some idiot to certain death. After a few moments though her mind continued to work and she realized that, with the way he had avoided her punches, as well as the way Nagato had chosen him to protect her, he must have at least some skill. Right now, with no other options and nowhere else to go, this kid is literally her best choice. However, she would be damned if she was going to admit out loud that there was just something about him that intrigued her. Ah, damn it. Wait up, shithead. She ran out of the room only to nearly trip up as she saw Naruto nonchalantly leaning up against the opposite wall of the corridor, grinning at her. She glared at him again and grumbled a few choice words in his direction. Well then, where the hell are we going? Naruto couldn't help but smile a bit when she had said, we. It made him feel strange and he briefly wondered if this was what having a friend felt like. Sunagakure. Tayuya was a little put off. The village hidden in the sand was an odd destination. Why? She seemed to have struck a chord there as Naruto's grin immediately dropped from his face and for the very first time, Tayuya was allowed a glimpse behind the mask. What she saw was pain, loneliness, suffering and sadness, all blended together in the boy's eyes. It seemed almost too much for a 7-year-old to have had in his life, but she had seen it for herself. As quickly as it had dropped, the mask sprung back into place, although the smile was small and weaker than before. I had to leave my home. Tayuya didn't press any further. It wasn't that she didn't want to know. In fact, he had actually gotten her pretty interested with that small display of emotion. It was the fact that if she started delving into his past, then he might get some funny ideas and start asking his own questions. She just nodded simply and Naruto turned away, walking out of the building with his new red-haired companion in tow. They had about 2 hours until the sun came up and Tayuya complained the entire time. Naruto just kept walking, tuning out the worst of it. He knew she was only doing it because she wasn't happy with the situation, not because she actually had anything to complain about. He simply talked to Kyubi for a lot of the time, having the usual lesson, only in his head as opposed to his mindscape. The old fox only seemed amused at the news of his new traveling companion and kept making jokes about it during their lesson, to the point where he simply ignored the both of them. That proved especially difficult when one of the people you were trying to ignore was inside your head and the other was only a few feet from you. He gritted his teeth and bore it, knowing that he would at least have sleep to look forward to. Eventually it was about time to start winding down for the night and he pulled over into a nearby clearing. He had gotten better at finding them over the week as he would locate a river or stream and follow it. They eventually found a decent-sized space about 20 feet wide with a stream large enough that Naruto could wash himself in it. First though he went about setting up the usual camp supplies while Tayuya watched his practiced motions with barely hidden interest. She had been surviving on her own for a while now but never in a total wilderness like this before. It was interesting to see the way he prioritized things like getting a fire going before collecting water to boil. She noticed the distinct lack of a tent and was nearly appalled when he only brought out 2 blankets. He seemed indifferent and threw her the other blanket. It was still late autumn and he knew it would be cold without the second blanket, but he would survive until they came across another village where he could pick up supplies. He mentally cursed himself all of a sudden. He had been in a town and forgot to pick up the various supplies he needed, but he put it down to the strange events and put it behind him. Hey shithead, do you really expect me to just sleep with a blanket? He looked at her curiously, wondering if this was genuine or another false complaint. When he noticed just how cold it was, he realized she was serious. Well, I don't have anything else, but we could share body heat. Tayuya's eyes opened wide at that statement, in no small part because he had said it completely seriously with no hint of a joke. Are you crazy or just fucking stupid? I'm not sleeping with you. Naruto furrowed his brow for a moment, put off slightly by the way she had said it, but just shrugged his shoulders. He offered to help. If she didn't take it, then it wasn't his problem. He figured after a night sleeping in the cold she would probably take him up on the offer. He was curious about her venomous reaction though. He didn't see anything wrong with sleeping next to someone if it was to just share heat. Oh Kit, you have so much to learn. That was followed by a great deal of snickering which only served to confuse Naruto more. He sighed. All these girls around him seemed to only make his life more complicated. He pulled a rabbit he had saved from yesterday out of his pack and put it in the pot of water to cook. After that he started making his way over to the river, shedding his clothes as he went. Tayuya had seen him start to cook. The rabbit made her mouth water a little, but she had snapped out of it when she saw the boy begin to undress. What the fuck are you doing? He didn't even slow down to answer, simply calling back over his shoulder. Washing, otherwise I have to wake up to the smell of sweat. He stopped, now down to his boxes which thankfully he seemed to be keeping on. If you don't mind, I'd appreciate you doing the same. Tayuya looked at him curiously, considering the words until they sunk in. Hey, are you saying I fucking stink? She heard him laugh softly, out of amusement instead of from his supposed insult. No more than anybody else. My nose is sensitive and I'm only just starting to get used to it. Tayuya barely heard the reply as she was already storming over to him, ready to beat an apology out of him. However, he turned around quickly, shocking her, already beating her to it. Sorry though, it probably came out the wrong way. Tayuya's anger died down a little, but not by much. It was at least nice that he had acknowledged he was in the wrong. Now that her mind wasn't quite so fuzzy with rage, she caught onto something else he had said. What do you mean? My nose is sensitive and I'm only just starting to get used to it. He smirked at her, but not in a condescending manner, just out of amusement. He pointed to his eyes slowly. My eyes didn't used to be like this, they only recently changed. It lets me see in the dark better, and sometimes I think I can see farther away, but I might be imagining it. Tayuya had noticed on their walk that he seemed to have an uncanny knack of seeing where he was going, despite it being so dark. She still didn't see what that had to do with his eyes, but she managed to be patient, crossing her arms and waiting for him to continue. My other sense got heightened as well, smell especially. Because it only happened recently, I'm still not used to everything smelling so much stronger, so I have to wash twice or sometimes 3 times a day. So like I said, if it's okay then I'd appreciate if you did too. Tayuya was a little put off by the polite and kind way he had asked it. There was no demand or forcefulness, just a request. She wasn't used to this kind of treatment at all, and it was beginning to unnerve her. She grumbled something under her breath which Naruto heard but didn't make any comment on. It can't be that bad. He grinned again, but this time because he was remembering some funny incidents that had arisen the first time he had awoken to the strength and smell of his own body. It can get pretty bad. He seemed to think that was a good enough answer and turned. If he put off his washing any longer, then he wouldn't get out with enough time to finish cooking the rabbit. He walked the small distance to the stream and jumped in. The cold water was refreshingly brisk, but he swam about a bit to stop himself from catching a cold. Seeing him wash, Tayuya grumbled again. However, she admitted to herself that that water did look good and she probably could do with a wash anyway. As she walked over, pulling off her top, she kept telling herself that this was for her, that she wasn't doing this because Naruto had asked her. She jumped in a little further upstream from him and nearly let out another stream of obscenities when she felt just how cold the water was. After a while though, her body got used to it and she swam around a little, making sure to go under every so often to clean her hair. She was surprised by how clean and clear the water was this far into a forest. She expected it to be muddy and full of leaves, but she could actually see the bottom. She was startled when she heard Naruto get out of the river and walk over to where the food was cooking. He pulled a towel out of his pack and was about to start wiping himself down when he thought better of it. When Tayuya also got out and joined him, he offered it to her. "What are you doing?" He shrugged but kept the towel in his outstretched hand. "I don't mind drip drying, plus if you go to sleep with wet hair you might catch a cold." She was startled by the show of concern for her well-being but managed to hide it from her face. Instead she begrudgingly took the towel, offering a half-mumbled thanks before dropping down next to him. The fire had died down a bit, so Naruto added some wood. The extra warmth was comforting to the 2 7-year-olds. They ate in silence, and after they were both fed and dry, Naruto offered an unreturned good night before rolling over in his blanket and closing his eyes. After a few minutes, Tayuya could tell from his steady breathing that he was asleep and tried to do the same. Unfortunately, Tayuya wasn't used to the cold air with only a blanket for warmth. She lacked Naruto's upbringing where even a cardboard box was shelter against the cold nights. As much as she tossed and turned, she just couldn't get to sleep. It didn't help that after a few minutes sunlight began to stream through the trees. She looked over to where Naruto was peacefully sleeping away, completely unaware of her annoyance, and suddenly his offer flashed through her mind. Once again she was overcome with indignation. She would not resort to that, being reliant on somebody just to get her through the night. However, as the minutes trickled by and she got no closer to sleep, her resolve began to waver. He did look warm, and right now she would practically give anything to get some sleep. She had tried not to show it before, but she was absolutely exhausted, having spent both the day and night awake with only a brief hour-long sleep in the hotel room. Even that didn't help her. As much as she lay there with her eyes closed, sleep just wouldn't take hold. Eventually she had to get up with no small amount of cursing and walked slowly over to where Naruto was sleeping. She narrowed her eyes and gritted her teeth before lifting up one side of his blanket. Naruto furrowed his brow at the sudden loss of heat, but his features settled into a soft smile when he felt a new source enter his temporary bed. Subconsciously his hand reached out and wrapped around the new source of warmth, pulling it closer. He may have been more used to sleeping in the cold, but that is just what it was, cold, and any warmth was welcomed. Tayuya let out a gasp when she felt Naruto's arm wrap around her. She was ready to turn around and slam him in the face, but when he muttered something incoherent she realized he was still asleep and her shoulders sagged. She would never admit it, but with his arm wrapped around her stomach she felt weird, protected and safe almost. She knew it was stupid. If they ever really got into any trouble, then there wouldn't be much he could do to help them, but that was the thought she was left with as sleep finally got to her. Naruto had woken up in a lot of different situations before, soaking wet in the tattered remains of a cardboard box, hanging upside down tied to a tree, half dead in the middle of a busy street, even being slowly buried in a large hole. However, of all of them, and for those in the near future, he would remember waking up next to Tayuya, with the gentle sense of apple and cinnamon in his nose, the strangest. If he had anything to compare it to, it would be the time a dog had wandered into the alley he had been sleeping in and nestled down next to him. He always remembered that night with fondness. The dog had obviously been astray, and he had taken comfort in being with something just as outcast as him. Waking up with the body heat of another living creature was a rare occurrence for Naruto, and on that morning, just like now, he savored every second of it. It actually took him a few moments to realize he had his arm wrapped around the sleeping girl, and a part of him didn't want to let go. It was a comfortable position, and if the gentle, steady breaths of Tayuya were anything to go on, then she didn't mind either. However, after some not so gentle insistence from Kyubi, he regretfully slid away from her. He got dressed after another dip in the river and a small breakfast. He had learned his lesson from their first day of training. He had eaten a rather large breakfast, being the bottomless stomach that he was, and had been sick after about an hour of the intense workout. After that, he had limited himself to a much small portion of food, which had the benefit of leaving him much hungrier for lunch. That also worked out for the better, as it gave him more energy for the chakra exercises, which wouldn't lead to him evacuating his stomach. He made a mental note that he would have to catch more food now that he had someone else to feed before going about his morning exercises with the usual vigor. It was 30 seconds after Tayuya woke up that she realized that there was something wrong. She couldn't quite place it at first as she lay under the blankets. It was dark out, but that wasn't all that unusual. She was in the middle of a forest, again weird but not all that unusual. It just wouldn't click, so she tried to roll back over and go back to sleep. Of course, that was when it struck her. She was smiling. That wasn't right, she never smiled. She quickly shot up out of the bed and forced her face back into her usual semi-scowl. Yesterday's events flooded back into her sleep-addled mind, and she hurriedly looked around her, expecting Naruto's sleeping form to be next to her. With an embarrassed blush, she noticed that he wasn't there. That meant that he had woken up and seen her asleep next to him. With scowl, she wondered why he had left her all alone, seemingly in the middle of the night. However, she brought the blanket closer to her when she wondered if he really had just left her. With a relieved sigh, she noticed that the fire was going and there was some food in the pot, obviously for her. Naruto's pack was also still there, although none of this answered her question as to where he had actually gone. As if the universe had heard her thoughts, she heard a grunt from somewhere away from the clearing. She stood up and was about to follow the sound when she actually took notice of her state of undress. She was about to put her shirt back on, but when she looked at it, she grimaced. The once white shirt was caked with dirt and mud, staining it forever a disgusting brown. She hadn't realized just how dire it had gotten because she hadn't taken it off for so long. She realized with a wince that Naruto's supposedly heightened nose must have had trouble just being around her wearing this thing. She sighed and threw it back down onto the floor. He had been nice enough to do all this for her. The least she could do was try and not make him throw up. She noticed one of Naruto's remarkably cleaner shirts sticking out from the top of his pack, and she threw it on. She didn't think he would mind. She didn't even have to wear pants with it on. It acted like a skirt, not that she was the type to wear skirts. Naruto was hardly a tall kid, although that had been improving recently with his better diet, but she was even shorter than he was, and the shirt was already too big for him. Clothed, she finally followed the sound to its source. It was a clearing not unlike the one they had slept in, but smaller and without the stream. The grunting was coming from Naruto, who seemed to be in the middle of what looked like exercises. Although this wouldn't have usually interested Tayuya, it was the fact that he was currently doing a handstand on 3 fingers from each hand, slowly pressing his body closer to the floor before bringing it back up with a grunt. She watched amazed as he continued this, not even noticing the fact that his strained grunts were actually numbers. She only took note of this when on his last one he pushed off a bit more vigorously, triumphantly calling out, 150, with a satisfied smile. Immediately Tayuya was disbelieving. There was no way the scrawny kid had managed to do 150 handstand press-ups. She figured he had seen her watching and was just boasting. However, after that he just seemed to move on to his next exercise, making no motion that he had even seen her. This time she got to watch through the entire thing as he miraculously performed 200 sit-ups whilst dangling from a tree. When he dropped down he had that same satisfied grin, but it didn't look cocky, just happy. He again made no move to show that he had seen her, but he called out into the clearing, seemingly at random. I know you're there, Tayuya, you can come out. Tayuya just did a double take but walked out into the clearing anyway, where a sweaty and tired-looking Naruto finally turned around to face her. How did you know I was there? He smiled sheepishly. I could smell you. Her brow furrowed for a moment. But how did you know it was me? His smile only widened. It's easy to tell apart different scents after a while. I knew it was you because I already smelled you. You smell of cinnamon and apples. He looked at her for a moment, wearing his t-shirt that acted like a dress. Although you did throw me off for a while by wearing my shirt, I didn't catch you until I started the sit-ups, and that was only because I moved. Tayuya tried not to look awed, but it was incredible, at least she didn't doubt his heightened senses anymore. With a small cringe she realized she hadn't taken a bath this morning, however he seemed to sense her concerns and smiled. Don't worry about it, all I can smell right now is my own sweat. Tayuya just nodded. She didn't need a super sense of smell to practically feel the aroma coming from Naruto. What are you doing out here? Naruto frowned. He would have thought it was obvious. Training. He said it as if Tayuya should have just known. It was the first time he had even shown a hint of condescension. Tayuya's annoyance was overcome by her curiosity. For what? Naruto's smile returned. He was onto a topic he enjoyed now. I'm a shinobi in training. I have to be as physically fit as I can. Tayuya looked at him curiously. She had heard of the ninja. You would be hard-pressed to find somebody in the elemental nations that hadn't. However, she wouldn't have thought that they started at such a young age. Why would you want to be a ninja? Naruto looked at her shocked. This new range of emotions he was giving off was becoming a bit much for Tayuya. Why wouldn't I? It's my dream to become a powerful shinobi and protect the people I care about. Once again Tayuya was intrigued. What people? I thought you said you had to leave your home. Who's worth protecting if you can't stay there anymore? Naruto's smile vanished immediately, replaced by a saddened look that once again allowed his mask to slip, however briefly. Tayuya knew she had hit that same sore spot as before and immediately tried to change the subject. She may not have liked people, but she wasn't a sadist. She didn't enjoy watching people suffering, which Naruto obviously was. There was also just something about him, something disarming that made her not want to see him hurt, in the same way that she knew he didn't want to see anybody else hurt. Why don't you tell me about being a ninja? Thankful for the distraction, Naruto slipped his mask back into place and a broad beaming smile lit up his face. Well, the most important thing to a shinobi is their chakra. Tayuya looked at him confusedly. What's chakra? Naruto's grin only grew. In his mind he was already thinking, just call me Uzumaki-sensei. Naruto was surprised at just how interested Tayuya seemed when he spoke about being a ninja. She took it in with more focus and genuine curiosity than he would have thought possible, at least for the short time he had known her. When she asked a question he didn't know, he would just ask Kyubi, who would quickly tell him before he passed the information along. She didn't even seem to mind when he took these pauses to talk with his tenant. She simply thought he was thinking about the answer. To say it surprised him that this impatient, angry, and generally cold person shared an interest with him would be an understatement. However, he was of course happy that they finally had something to talk about that involved minimal swearing on her part. Unfortunately for him, her main area of interest when he began talking about the aspects of being a ninja was genjutsu. While Kyubi had slowly been getting him to appreciate the style, he still didn't know nearly enough to satisfy her questions. Instead of asking Kyubi every time, he sometimes simply told her that he didn't know enough about it. She seemed disappointed. It was another strange reaction he wouldn't have expected, even if she did cover it well. Even so, he could see that all her unanswered questions left her wanting for more. He offered to let her train with him, and even though she looked hesitant, especially after seeing what he could do, she tentatively agreed. He had quickly assured her that she wouldn't start off at his level after Kyubi informed him why she seemed unsure. Since it was still morning, Naruto would usually have kept on with his physical training, but Kyubi seemed to let him off for once, instead opting to travel a bit more. They packed up and set off at a decent pace, even if it wasn't quite as fast as Naruto or his passenger would have liked. While Naruto's night vision was now excellent, Tayuya was only human and couldn't keep the pace he set with the same confidence. If she had doubted his enhanced vision before, she disregarded that notion after seeing just how quickly he could move. Eventually, after a decent 2 hours of moving, they pulled into another clearing. Tayuya caught her breath, still unused to just how far and fast a shinobi could move, while Naruto set up the camp. After he was done, he looked at the sprawled out form of Tayuya on the ground with a smirk. He noticed that she was still wearing his black t-shirt from this morning, although she had put her old black pants back on. That only left him with the single shirt, increasing his need to find a village or town and resupply. He left the clearing for a bath, and when she felt strong enough to stand, Tayuya joined him. After last night, she had lost her reservations. She knew there was something she was supposed to know about boys and girls bathing together, but nobody had ever really told her the specifics. Either way, she had felt sweaty after the fast-paced trek of that night, and she needed the soak just as much as Naruto did. After they were finished and Naruto had cooked them both a quick lunch, although both were ravenous, he sat down to begin his chakra exercises. For a few minutes, Tayuya watched with curiosity until frustration set in with Naruto being so inactive. She walked over to him, watching the smoldering leaf in his hand the entire time. Before tonight, she would have been amazed that the small burning hole in the center wasn't moving outwards, but after her lecture on chakra, she understood that many more things than she could have imagined were now possible. Naruto opened his eyes when he heard and smelt her draw closer. He chuckled sheepishly when he realized what he had done. He stood up, meeting Tayuya's irritated gaze with his own semi-apologetic grin. After that and some less than gentle encouragement from Tayuya, he began to teach and show her how to mold and form her chakra. He was once again surprised by how quickly she took to the supposedly alien concept, although after displaying her aptitude for learning, he shouldn't have been shocked. That was all he could do on the first day, but he knew that Tayuya showed prodigious skill for somebody completely new to being a ninja. He himself had spent 3 days just getting basic chakra molding down, and she seemed competent enough after the first day. He smiled a wide grin when they were done. With Kyubi guiding him and him guiding her, they would develop greatly. Already in his mindscape, Kyubi was adjusted her daily plan for Naruto to incorporate the girl. She knew the value of having somebody just as powerful, if maybe slightly less so, to back you up. She didn't want anything to happen to her container, so this was like an extra insurance to the ancient being. Not to mention the fact that it injected a bit of amusement into her day to watch the two kids interact. The fact that Tayuya couldn't get under Naruto's skin no matter how hard she tried was impressive to watch, even if the girl didn't realize there was a spectator to their verbal spars. Tayuya didn't realize how exhausting all the work had been until it was over. The wave of fatigue hit her like a rock and she almost fell asleep on the spot. It was only the cold and the fact that she didn't want to appear undignified that kept her awake. She also didn't want to be the first to fall asleep. It showed weakness which she wouldn't do in front of her companion. It didn't really matter to her that he didn't see it that way, but the rational part of her mind wasn't at 100% due to exhaustion. Naruto still had his late-night lesson with Kyubi to go. It felt unfair as Tayuya had no such advantage, but he didn't want to forego his own learning. He also saw how stubborn she was being about sleep, despite what some people believed about his perception. It was easy to see that she was fighting a losing battle with the Sandman, and while she wouldn't easily admit it, she would probably need to sleep near him for the warmth. He sighed and walked over to where she was wearily sitting and pulled out the blankets. He passed one to her as he had the previous night. He knew that she wasn't going to accept his offer of sleeping together again if he asked anyway. He lay down to sleep, or at least that was how it appeared, and waited. Sure enough, after a while Tayuya crept over to him without him giving away any sign that he noticed, or was even awake, and slipped under the sheet with him, nestling closer to his body for its warmth. Because of last night he knew it wasn't a problem, so he slipped an arm around her waist and pulled her slightly closer, masking it with incoherent muttering. He felt her freeze for a moment, her body becoming rigid, before she relaxed into the position. When he finally felt her breathing steady and heard her heartbeat slow, he sighed with a smile before losing himself to his subconscious. Kyubi was already waiting for him, a sly grin on the vixen's features, but she alluded to nothing as she started the lesson. This was essentially the way the rest of that week went. Naruto's training continued as normal, as did his daily routine. He would awaken, wash, eat, train, walk for a few hours, eat, train, eat, and then pretend to sleep while he had his lesson. Although this time he had a companion, Tayuya would join him in training as it was half between him practicing and learning whilst the rest of the time he would teach her before leaving her to her own devices. This was true for both the physical and chakra exercises, although he had to exclude her from the lessons. Every night was also the same story. Tayuya would accept the blanket before retiring some distance away in the clearing. She would then fight a losing battle against the elements and her own mind before creeping over to Naruto and sliding under the blankets with him. He was still wondering why she bothered hiding it by the end of the week. She must know that he knew, after all he woke up before her every day. He chuckled in his thoughts. If he could safely say that he had learnt anything over the past week, and he had learnt a lot, it was that Tayuya was not a morning person. He had made the mistake of knocking her slightly when he woke up one morning and had received a swift punch in the gut for his troubles. That was another thing he was noticing. While Tayuya did not have as harsh a physical regiment as he did, it was still having a noticeable effect on her speed and strength. When he had met her, she had been a rather scrawny girl. With his meals and the training they did, she was quickly filling out into more healthy proportions for somebody her age. He of course didn't notice that the same was true for himself. Living off of instant ramen for the past few years, and scraps before that, hadn't left him the healthiest of specimens. Now that he was eating right, with plenty of protein from the animals he caught, he too was gaining a healthier physique. He might have even noticed that he had grown a bit. Although of all the good changes that had come about over the week, there were some things that wouldn't change. Naruto was upset and frustrated that in all that time Tayuya hadn't lowered her guard emotionally even once. He tried his best to be there, never prying too hard but always reminding her that he was in fact there. She kept trying to distance him, almost as if she just expected him to leave her at any moment, something he definitely had no intention of doing. He had mused on it a lot, figuring he would need to make some kind of gesture to prove that he wasn't going to leave her. It was her unwillingness to change this, and a few other aspects of her attitude, that made it all the more surprising when the first cracks did start to show. He would remember the start of that exactly 1 week after the two had met. Hey shithead. He grimaced inwardly. While on some level he had ruefully accepted the nickname, he would still prefer she used his real one like he showed the courtesy of doing for her. However, after a while he had managed to stop reacting to the name, which caused her to use it less often when it had less of an effect. Yes, Tayuya. He was curious to what she wanted. They had just finished the dinner and were about to go to sleep, or at least she was. He immediately noticed how uncomfortable the girl seemed and had tried to be careful in the tone of his reply. She seemed to take a few moments. Whatever she wanted to say was obviously difficult. About sleeping? He started to see where this was going but acted ignorant. What is it? Do you want both the blankets tonight? I can go without them if you want. She scowled for a moment. It was still too strange for her to have somebody this selfless around. She never knew quite how to respond when he made a gesture like this. In the middle of the week he had only managed a measly catch for their lunch, and despite his obvious hunger he offered her the much larger share. Of course she had acted indignant that he would think she needed more, like she was weak, but deep down she was touched. Well no, it's not. Well, you know, in the mornings. His semi-serious expression was starting to put her off asking what she had come over to ask, but she was a stubborn person. Why, you don't mind me, you know. Damn. Where had the damn stutter come from? She hadn't stuttered shyly like that in years. Naruto on the other hand allowed a warm smile to grace his features, trying to lighten the tense atmosphere. Of course not. I offered it in the first place, remember? She narrowed her eyes. Of course she remembered. Didn't he see how uncomfortable this made her? As if he was reading her mind, Naruto gave her a penetrating look while maintaining the smile. I didn't press it. It was your choice and I don't like pressuring people. Tayuya was shaken by the answer. He was actually respecting her by not saying anything. The thought hadn't even crossed her mind. She scowled again at how he was yet again getting into her head, and her tone regained some of its stubborn edge. Yeah, well, I'm just letting you know I don't care anymore. It's fucking cold out here, and if I need you as a pillow then I'm damn well going to use you like one. She glared defiantly at him, daring him to respond, but he didn't. She was a little irked when his smile didn't waver, but when he shrugged she mentally took that as a victory and stalked away smirking towards the river. Naruto watched her leave with his own smirk. In the head he was visualizing a massive dam of tremendous proportions. Before his eyes a single tiny crack appeared and the tiniest trickle of water came gushing out. Well, it's a start. It was late on in their second week together that the pair finally came across another village. This time Naruto kept to the forest for much longer before emerging out onto the road right before the town itself. It was somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning, so the single guard was hardly alert. He let the two young children through the gate with barely more than a glance. From their state of dress he had assumed they were either orphans or refugees. He didn't realize how right he was. It wasn't really all that late for Tayuya or Naruto, being only about 2/3 of the way through their waking day, but the stores were all closed this early, or late depending on one's viewpoint. Instead they opted to settle down in a quiet alley behind a restaurant and get some sleep before morning. The gentle scents of food and the sounds of the sleeping village lulled the children into sleep. If anybody had come across the scene, they may have found it cute to see two young orphans sleeping under a pair of blankets, huddled together for warmth. When morning did come, Naruto was the first awake as usual. It was actually rather disconcerting to wake up and not immediately spring into physical exercise. It was also strange to wake up to somewhat weak daylight. After so long in the dark relying on his night vision, it took him a few minutes to adjust, the light hurting his sensitive eyes. He could only imagine that it would be worse for Tayuya. She had no night vision to rely on and would be going straight from pitch black to daylight, a prospect he'd be less than ecstatic about. He stretched a bit to alleviate the worst of the aches that had accumulated from sleeping on the rough alley floor. He knew he would regret his next action later, but he didn't like the idea of leaving Tayuya alone while he went about the town getting a sense of the land. She might have woken up and thought that he had abandoned her. After a moment or two of deliberation, he decided against waking her himself. He told himself repeatedly that it was because he felt she deserved the extra few minutes of sleep, not that he was afraid of her reaction. However, when a few minutes turned into 30, he was forced to gently shake her shoulders until her eyes blearily opened. Suddenly they snapped apart and a sneer made its way onto her face, but before she could slug him, he leapt back and she got a look at their surroundings. The fact that they were surrounded by buildings surprised her until she remembered how they had arrived here. Even more groggily than usual, thanks to the near blinding sunlight, she rose up and did a few stretches herself. When they both agreed they were ready, they packed up what little they had brought out of the bag last night and walked out of the alley. Before they got out completely, Tayuya thumped him lightly on the shoulder. She had held back her full strength, but Naruto still rubbed the spot gingerly, looking at her strangely. "You know how I feel about you dodging me in the mornings, shithead." She didn't offer any more of an explanation as they emerged onto the quiet street. Naruto was slightly confused. The town was small, but definitely not that small. This time in the morning there should have been people bustling to and fro on the daily business. Men going off to work in the surrounding mines or shops, women out getting the supplies they needed for the day or week, even kids running about being a general nuisance. He shrugged it off as one of those oddities, but his brow unconsciously furrowed a little. One look from Tayuya told him that she had noticed the same thing, both of them having spent enough time on the streets to understand how places like this worked. Naruto had to put it to the back of his mind as he entered the first shop on their path. It was a general store, selling all the necessities for travelers like themselves, a perfect place to pick up the few things they were missing. Inside the shop they were once again reminded just how quiet this place was. There wasn't a soul in the shop except for the slightly nervous-looking shopkeeper. He idly stood behind the counter, obviously unnerved by the two children and looking like any moment he might make a break for it. The pair didn't say anything, but internally they were just as uncomfortable as the clerk looked. Of course Tayuya was better at hiding this behind her ever-present scowl, but Naruto managed to keep his emotions in long enough for them to get out and allowed himself to breathe a small sigh. They hurried across the street, not wanting to spend more time than they had to in this disconcerting area, at least during the day when they couldn't help but feel vulnerable. Naruto didn't know if he was becoming paranoid, but he started to understand why Kyubi had chosen for him to travel at night. "You're welcome, Kit. Although I share your concerns, I would recommend you leave this place quickly." Naruto quickly nodded his head in the affirmative, knowing that the Kyubi would understand the gesture. As time had drawn on from his initial transformation, Kyubi had managed to access more and more of his senses through their internal link. At first it was strange, knowing that everything he experienced wasn't his alone, but as he got used to it the sensation barely even registered anymore. The two training ninjas quickly entered the store, only just noticing that it was a clothes shop. Naruto was grateful. Between the two of them they had 2 shirts, and no matter how much you washed something in cold water there was a limit to what you were covering up. He smiled for the first time since noticing the strange atmosphere and turned to his companion. She was already gone, wandering up and down the aisles of the small shop, idly looking at clothes and occasionally pulling items off of the racks only to put them back on after a frown. Naruto also frowned as he patted him pocket. Gama-chan was a little lighter after they had bought all the necessities in the other store. It would clear him out to buy clothes for both himself and Tayuya. At least he assumed that from the way she was dressed before and the smell of the streets that clung to her back then that she wasn't exactly rolling in yo. Even so, he smiled as he watched the girl walk around the store. It was obviously an experience she was unused to. He snapped out of his idle thoughts after he heard a cough from the vendor. It was obviously aimed in his direction even though the man looked away from him when Naruto turned to look. Again he held that same uncomfortable aura that had surrounded the last shopkeeper. Naruto frowned again, but acting on the man's unvoiced request he started looking through the various aisles of clothing to see what was in his price range. He was more than surprised when he started looking at the price tags. Everything was a lot cheaper here than in Konoha. In the stores back home, at least the ones he was grudgingly allowed into, the prices were at least 3 times this amount. He grinned broadly. Maybe he wouldn't be cleaned out after this after all. Of course that smile immediately dropped off his face when he saw Tayuya rounding the corner of the aisle he was standing in with a bundle of clothes in her arms. There was everything there from shirts to pants to hats, gloves, shorts, a few pairs of shoes and a jacket. There were also a few items hidden purposefully further into the bundle that Naruto couldn't see, and Tayuya hoped to keep it that way. She had grown used to wearing guys' boxes in the last few weeks because there was little else for her to wear, but for some reason she wasn't alright with Naruto seeing them. His eyes bulged at the ungainly pile of clothing, marveling at how the girl had picked it all out so quickly. So shithead, are you just gonna stand there gawking like a pussy, or are you going to pick out some clothes? Her words snapped him out of the half-daze he had fallen into, entranced by all the colors in the pile. He shook his head and looked around for a moment. Eyes immediately rested on something that brought a wide grin to his face. Just as he was reaching for the bright orange jumpsuit, a hand caught his wrist faster than he would have believed if he hadn't seen it for himself. You touch that fucking piece of bastardized fabric some fucktard had the balls to call clothes, and I'll rip off your arm and use it to paint it a better color. Naruto visibly paled from the shocking statement, looking at the girl with eyes the size of dinner plates. When she finally released the vice-like grip on his wrist, he returned it to his side, rubbing it slightly to get the circulation going again. Tayuya could get shockingly strong when properly angry. What's wrong with it? Her eyes tried to bore a hole directly into his forehead. When that didn't work, she sighed. It was more out of anger and frustration than any kind of disappointment, although that was mixed in there as well. You wanna be a fucking shinobi, right? She tried not to shout but couldn't help her voice from raising a few decibels. When he nodded, a bit too enthusiastically for her liking, she continued. Then you can't go around wearing a color that practically shouts, I'm over here, come fucking stab me. Naruto furrowed his brow, taking another look at the jumpsuit on the rack before glancing back to Tayuya. He didn't see what was wrong with it. The color orange was great, but he had a hard time trying to see past Tayuya's harsh logic. Orange was terrible for camouflage in any environment. Yeah, you're right, Tayuya. She was surprised that the kid had come around so easily, expecting him to put up more of a fight. She narrowed her eyes at him, wondering what the ulterior motive was, but when he began to look around the shelves again, she loosened up. Damn right, I'm fucking right. It was more of a whisper to herself than anything else, but with his superior hearing, Naruto caught it anyway, and it brought a small smile to his face. He went around the store picking up a few items of clothing, mostly black or dark navy shirts, but he added in one orange one, thinking that it wouldn't be too bad if he wore a jacket. He had picked out the perfect one, a dark green coat that was warm and comfortable while coming down past his mid-thigh. He also picked up a few pairs of black pants. They were nothing special, but they looked incredibly comfortable. All the while he had Kyubi in his head mentally nodding her head at his various choices. Her only real concern was whether or not they would hamper his movements. He topped off the pile with a new pair of black sandals and a couple of boxer shorts, not caring if Tayuya saw them in the same way she did. When he was finally done, the two kids dumped their piles of clothing down on the counter as the clerk very quickly sorted through them. When the price flashed up, Naruto's eyes widened once again. 1,600 yo seemed a little steep. Then again, when he looked at the rather large pile of clothing, he realized that there was a bit more there than he thought originally. He smiled sheepishly with one hand rubbing the back of his head before looking into his wallet with no small amount of uncertainty. Tayuya, I can afford all of this. Tayuya just narrowed her eyes and looked at her pile of clothes defiantly. Well then put some of your clothes back. Naruto's eyebrows shot up at her suggestion. What? Why do I have to go back? I'm paying. Tayuya only placed her arms across her chest, smirking evilly. Nagato said you had to protect me. Naruto growled lightly under his breath. She would always pull that card if she saw an argument veering from her favor. He knew she didn't actually mean what she said. She wasn't exactly the type who wanted to be looked after, and it was more for the pleasure of seeing Naruto squirm a little. Yeah, well, protect didn't mean cater to, the last time I checked. Naruto tried to put defiance into his words, but he couldn't help rubbing the petal mark on his wrist. How the fuck would you know, shithead? When was the last time you read the fucking dictionary? Naruto was about to retort again, not willing to lose the argument when the store clerk cut in for him. That's absolutely fine. Everything's half price today. He said it very quickly, the desperation painfully obvious in his voice. It was almost like a silent request for the two of them to just pay and get out of his store. Naruto was about to ask him about it when Tayuya sent him a warning glare. She knew he was the type to question these things. She on the other hand never looked a gift horse in the mouth. Or at least she wouldn't after making sure it wasn't going to try and kill her at least. The pair walked out of the store with mixed feelings after packing all of their recent purchases into their packs. Naruto was still curious about the strange behavior of the few people in this town, while at the same time he was happy that Gama-chan hadn't been completely emptied. Tayuya was happy about getting the new clothes, even if she wouldn't show it. It had been a long time since she had new clothes, barring the shirt and pants she had borrowed from Naruto. Their shopping done and seeing no other reason to stay in the town, despite Naruto's curiosity, the two began their way to the exit of the town in silence that matched the rest of the eerily quiet village. They were completely ignorant to the two men that watched their progress from the darkness of the alleyway. They watched the two kids with keen interest, scrutinizing them for who they were and just what they were doing. The first man was a large, burly man with muscles rippling over his body, barely constrained by his thin vest and two short pants. The other man by contrast was a twig, scrawnier than most girls half his age, however he held a posture that told of speed and cunning to the trained eye. The two were practically binary opposites of one another. The larger man had long unruly hair that traveled past his shoulders, whereas the smaller man's hair was shaved to the scalp. So, these are the kids that Conan took an interest in. It was the larger man who asked the question and looked to his smaller companion for the reply. Where the burlier man was impatient and only thought one step ahead of himself, the thin man was much more collected, always planning and conniving to get his ends. It would appear so. They matched the description at least. He talked slowly, as if measuring out each word for maximum impact. The bigger man grinned broadly, excited by the prospects of what was to come. There were a few things he relished, and kidnapping was among them. The intoxicating feeling of having complete and total control over your hostage was indescribable. The other man was far more displeased. Kidnappings were too much trouble for too little reward, barely worth his time. Unfortunately, when their boss asked for something, it took an idiotic or idiotically brave man to say no. I wonder what she saw in them. The thin man looked contemplative as he carefully watched the children begin their journey out of the village. Who the fuck cares? Let's just grab them. His partner shot him a withering look, placing a hand on his bulging shoulder. Patience in all things, Kajiro, we must be discreet about this. Drawing attention where the information may get back to our real target would be troublesome to say the least. Kajiro frowned. Mishoto was always like this, ruining his fun. He sighed but nodded meekly. He knew better than to anger his companion, having learned that the hard way when they had first been introduced. Do not worry, Kajiro, you will get to have your fun in time. For now we must observe and only observe. These children may serve to surprise us yet. Mishoto knew never to underestimate any opponent, no matter how young or small. Having met many of the young shinobi from the various hidden villages was enough to cement that belief. While these children hardly looked like ninja, it never hurt to be cautious. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.